Roadside Theater of Whitesburg, Kentucky presents Fatter Lean. Music and story by Ron Short and Tom Bledsoe. Drawings by Angelyn DeBord.
Once upon a time, there was an old man, and he lived with his oldest boy. Now, about 2 miles from where they lived, there was this old painted house. Now, that man claimed he had the rheumatism, and he hadn't walked a step in 15 years.
Ne'er done a lick of work, neither.
But one day, he got on his boy,
So to speak.
to carry him down there and stay with him. Said he wanted to see that Hank. So that evening, that boy shouldered up his old daddy, and away they went.
Now, that very same evening, there was 2 other fellers that lived up there in that little community where they lived. And these was rowdy boys.
Ruffians.
And these rowdy boys, they had decided to go out that night, too. But what they was going to do was go down to some poor old farmer's place, steal one of his sheeps, take it up to that old haunted house, and said they was going to
cook it.
Well, this one feller, he was to go steal the sheep, and the other was to go get the firewood for to cook him with. So he went up to this old haunted house. He gathered up a nice big stack of firewood, sat down to wait for his buddy to come back with that sheep. Well, his buddy didn't come back for the longest time, so this feller, he got tired of waiting. He just climbed up into the loft of that old haunted house, laid down, went sound asleep.
Directly, here come that man and that boy up to that old house.
Well, now that feller, a-layin' up there in the loft, he heard 'em a-comin' up, and he thought that it was his buddy had come back with that big sheep. So, in a kindly low voice, he just leaned over and he whispered,
"Is he fat?"
Well, that boy thought it was that big booger Hank.
And he got scared and threw down his old daddy and said, "Well, Fatter Lean, you can have him." And he took back up the road as hard as he could go.
Well, that poor old man, he hit the floor, jumped up on them so-called crippled legs of his, and he took off down the road behind that boy just as hard as he could go. And they tell us that old man beat that boy home
A good 5 minutes.
And they also say that he wasn't ever bothered with that rheumatism ever again.
Big Toe, a story told by Roadside Theater.
One time, there was a little old man and a little old woman and a little old boy. And one evening, they was all out in the garden a-digging taters for their supper. They is real poor people. Didn't have no meat for supper, just taters. Well, the little old man, he hoed along and hoed along. That little old woman, she hoed along and hoed along. And that little old boy, he hoed along and hoed along too. Well, pretty soon, that little old man, he got his little tin bucket full, and he went on back to the house. That little old woman, she got her little tin bucket full, and she went on back to the house. That little old boy, he kept a-hoeing along, but pretty soon he got tired of hoeing. He got to piddling and a-playing in the dirt, drawing pictures and letters and such, a-wishing that he had a big chunk of meat for supper. And then he noticed, over in the back of the garden, a big old holler log. So he got to fooling around that old holler log, and he saw that there in the mouth of that old holler log was the strangest looking tater he had ever seen. Well, he got out his little old hole, and he give that tater a whack. Reached down, picked it up, and put it in his little tin bucket. About that time, that little old boy heard something kindly like a moan a-coming from way back in that old holler log. So he got down to have a look in there, and there, in the darkest depths of that old holler log, two big old eyes opened up and stared out at him. That little old boy, he snatched up his little tin bucket and he made for the house, a whippity-cutter running through that garden, knocking bean poles and corn stalks every which way. He run in the house and slammed the door. Then they all sat down and they commenced peeling on them taters. That little old boy, now he kept that strange-looking tater in his pocket. And finally, they got them taters all peeled. That little old man, he went out after a turn of firewood. That little old woman, she got a great big old pot, hung it up in the fireplace, poured in some water, and dumped in the taters. The little old boy, he run out on the back porch, and he washed that strange-looking tater in the wash basin there. And then he snuck back in and he waited till that little old woman had her back turned a-setting the table. Then he snatched off that pot lid and he popped that strange-looking tater in with all them other taters. Well, pretty soon that little old man, he got the wood all cut, brought it in, throwed it down by the fire, and pulled up his favorite chair to wait for the taters to cook. That little old woman, she got that table set up real pretty, pulled up her favorite chair, and sat down to wait for the taters to cook. That little old boy, he sat down right between them, doubled his legs up under him, and they all waited, and they waited, and directly them taters got done. That little old woman, why, she scooped up a big mess of taters and took them to the table, and they all got them a big mess of taters and started in and eating. That little old man, he tasted his taters and says, neat. Why, the little old woman tasted her taters and said, neat. Little old boy, he tasted his taters and he didn't say nothing. Then they all got done eating and they sat down in front of the fire. Then they heard something a-coming from away off. Little old woman, she jumped up and she run, hid under the bed. Little old man and the little old boy, they sat right on. Then they heard it again, a-coming closer. Little old man, he jumped up, run, hid under the bed. Little old boy, he sat right on. He's sort of scared and kindly sleepy. Then he heard it coming closer. Oh, my big toe. He heard it crawling up on the porch roof. Oh, my big toe. He heard it climbing up on the housetop. Oh, my big toe. He heard it scratching on the chimney, saw soot falling. He looked up, and there, on a smoke shelf, sat a great big old hairy booger.
What you got them big ears for?
The better to hear you with.
What you got such big old eyes for?
The better to see you with.
What you got them big, long, sharp claws for?
To dig your grave, 'cause I'm to dig your grave.
What you got such big, long, sharp teeth for?
To eat you up. Roadside Theater of Whitesburg, Kentucky presents The Little Fish Story, as told by Angelyn DeBord, music by Ron Short, and drawings by Angelyn DeBord.
One time there was a little girl. Now this was a very long time ago, back when if you wanted running water in the house, well now you just had to run down to the spring and get it. So this little girl's job was to go to the spring each morning, get the water. One morning when she was dipping up water from the spring, a little fish swam right into her water bucket. Now, she had never seen a fish in the spring before, and she had never seen a fish like this one anywhere. It looked like every color in the whole world had come together in this little fish. And every time that little fish would wiggle, them colors, they'd just change. But the little girl knowed. Now, no matter how pretty that little fish was, it wouldn't do to take it home in a water bucket. So she poured it out and went to dip some more. And there it was in her bucket again. So she dumped it out and dipped it up again. Finally, she just gave up. She carried her bucket on up to the house, plumb full of water, fish and all. She took it in and she dumped it in the big water crock there in the kitchen, turned to walk away, and she heard a cursed splash. Well, she looked back, and that little fish, it was following her across the floor like a little puppy dog. So she picked it up, put it back in that water crock again. But the next morning, when she went to get some water, that little fish jumped out of that water. It followed her around the kitchen floor for an hour. The next day, it followed her around 2 hours. The next day, 3, 4, 5, 6, got to where that little fish stayed out of the water as long as the sun was up in the sky. When the sun went down, it got back in the water. But it got to where it wouldn't even do that. Of an evening, when the little girl would go to bed, that little fish would just crawl up on the pillow beside her, go to sleep. At first, on a Sunday afternoon, that little fish, it would go down to the creek and go swimming with the little girl. But then it even stopped doing that. It'd just sit up on the bank, wait for her to finish, then go on home with her. Oh, that little girl and that fish, they got to be real good friends. They stayed together all the time. They even played dress up. But time went on, and that little girl, she got older, as little girls have a way of doing. And it come time for her to start school for the very first time. So she lit out down this little path through the woods to school, and that little fish started out right behind her. But now that little girl knowed it wouldn't do to have a fish come to school with her. So she shooted on back in the house, said, "Go on, get back in there, shoot, get." She run it back in that house. She slammed the door. But the little fish, it found a window open just a little bit, wiggled through that window, followed her down that path. But she didn't know it was even back there. Well, she walked along. Finally, she crossed this little foot log over a little creek there. She got over there and she heard this cursed splash. She run back. She looked way down in the water. And there, her little fish, it had slipped off that foot log, fallen down in the creek, and it had drowned. But right where that little fish went under the water, Big rays of color shot way up in the sky, made a great big arch. And now back in the Smoky Mountains, where I come from, they say that that's where the first rainbow ever got started.